All right, there we go. Rick, thank you so much for helping us tonight moderate, and thank you to our host, Maine-Endwell, so much for opening up the auditorium for our town hall meeting, and thank all of you for braving the cold weather to be here tonight. I'd like to start off just giving you a little bit of an update of some of the stuff that I've been working on, and then just happy to take your questions, but it really means a lot to me to see all of you here tonight, to be able to ask questions, express your concerns, and for me to be able to talk to you about what's going on down in Washington and what I've been working on. I like doing these town hall meetings because I think that the best quality any representative can have is to be a good listener, to really stop talking and to listen to the people that you represent. And one of the best ways to do that is just to have open town hall meetings where you can come, ask whatever question, we don't pre-screen questions, and then we can have an honest dialogue about where we stand, and even if we don't agree, which a lot of times we may not agree, but I hope you walk away tonight with a feeling that you've been heard, and we can have that mutual respect. So it's been about a year since I was sworn in. We've been working very hard on the 3 committees that I sit on. I got appointed to 3 committees in the House of Representatives: Veterans Affairs, the Agriculture Committee, and Armed Services. And when I first got into the House, I listed these committees as committees that I wanted to serve on because they are, in my opinion, committees that are important to the district. The 22nd district that we live in, which spans all the way from Lake Ontario down to the Pennsylvania border, is home to 50,000 veterans. And it's very important to me to make sure that our veterans are getting the services that they earned and how we can better align policies to support our veterans. The Agriculture Committee is also a very important committee for this district because we have a lot of farms in our district. Most of those farms are smaller family farms, and I want to make sure that the work I'm doing is geared more towards supporting the smaller family farms in our district, not those larger corporate farms that you see out there. And then finally, the Armed Services Committee, again, a very important committee, not only to support the men and women who wear our uniform, but also a very important committee for our district. There's a lot of defense-related installations throughout the district. Up in the Oneida County area, you have the Air Force Research Laboratory. Today, I was touring BAE over in Endicott. They do a lot of defense systems that go into fighter jets and tanks and things like that. They employ about 1,300 people there. So I think it's an important committee, making sure that our men and women who wear the uniform have all the tools and resources they need, and also supporting some good companies here in the district. In the past year, despite what you might see on TV, we've had a lot of success being able to work with Democrats and Republicans to get some things done. I've sponsored and had signed into law 5 different pieces of legislation that President Trump has signed into law. First bill that I got passed and signed into law was a bill to support our veterans who reside in more rural areas, to extend some programs to them for transportation and housing assistance. New York 2022, our district, is a very rural district, and transportation, housing are hard to come by sometimes, especially as you get into more rural areas. So we passed some legislation to support veterans who are living in more rural areas. Another issue that I've been really working on the Veterans Affairs Committee is the issue is surrounding mental health and the suicide rate that you're seeing among our veterans right now. It's an awful statistic, but one that we have to confront, is that every day in our country we are losing 20 veterans to suicide. And of that number, 14 of those veterans are not coming forward to the VA to get the services that they earn. To me, in the greatest country on the face of the earth, that's a real travesty, and we have to be doing a much better job at the VA supporting our veterans and dealing with the mental health issues many veterans are now facing as they return home from the global war on terror, perhaps overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the bill that I worked with a Republican colleague of mine from Illinois would help provide more resources in the VA for what they call suicide prevention coordinators, These folks are really the frontline workers at the VA who are dealing with suicide prevention, and it's also their responsibility to get out into the community to try and find those 14 veterans who, for whatever reason, are not coming into the VA, to let them know what services are available for them. And I was very proud to get that bill signed into law. We also passed, I led a bill to repeal a health insurance tax that was set to go into effect this year, that would have affected about, I think it's about 150 million Americans that would have seen an increase in their health insurance premiums if you get your health insurance through your employer, or if you are on a Medicare Advantage plan or Part D plan. You would have seen an increase in your premiums this year as a result of this health insurance tax that was set to go into effect. And I led the charge to repeal that tax. They had been delaying it year after year. The bill that I sponsored, which was incorporated into the spending bill that passed at the end of the year, repealed that health insurance tax outright. So folks who are on Medicare Advantage programs, Part D, or if you get your insurance through your private employer, that cost will not be going into effect. We also passed a bill that would require the military to purchase American-made flatware. I get known now as the spoons guy down in Washington, and I'll just give you a little backstory about this piece of legislation. This is a bill that had been introduced in the past, but unfortunately it failed twice on the House floor and could not get passed into law. So when I took office, we reached out to the company up in Oneida County and asked if they wanted to continue this effort, and they said absolutely. So we had to pick up the pieces and put everything back together, and we got the bill passed in the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the bill that funds the military. But essentially, how many of you ever heard of Oneida Limited, the flatware? You guys familiar with Oneida? Okay. So up until 2006, I think it was, the Department of Defense had to purchase, under this amendment, American-made flatware for our soldiers. And in 2006, Congress repealed this amendment because there were no American-made flatware companies left. Oneida had closed their factory up in Sherrill, New York, and moved their facility overseas. Well, the good part of this was there were two guys that bought the factory and started a company called Sherrill Manufacturing, and they make a product called Liberty Tabletop Flatware, which is the only now American-made flatware company manufactured here in the 22nd District. So when I took office, we talked to the two owners, and they wanted to continue this effort to try and reinstate this amendment to require the military to purchase American-made flatware. So we got to work and worked with a Republican colleague of mine from West Virginia who has a dinnerware company in his district, and we worked together to get the bill included in the House Defense Authorization Act, and then we worked with our senators here in New York to get them to put it into the Senate version and then signed into law by the President. So now the military is required to purchase American-made flatware if there's two things that are met. One, that we have a domestic supply. Obviously, we don't want them, if there's no domestic supply, you can't put that mandate on them. But secondly, the price, if the price is on par with where it should be. And this is something I want to work on even more going forward, because there's a lot of talk in Washington about buying American, supporting American manufacturing. Well, to me, what better place to start than with our own tax dollars that are going to fund the Department of Defense or other federal agencies. If our money is going towards these taxes, then I think these agencies should be purchasing from American manufacturing companies and supporting American workers, as long as there's a domestic supply and the price is competitive. I don't want to see our tax dollars going overseas. I took a lot of heat during this from a certain member of the Armed Services Committee. He said, what do we care, forks and spoons and knives, how's that a national security issue that should be included in the defense bill? I said, well, think about it. If our tax dollars are going to support an American company, which is paying American workers who pay taxes in this country, that money's going into the federal coffers and it's going to support our military. I'd rather see that money going into to our budget, as opposed to sending that money overseas to support a Chinese manufacturer, to support the Chinese military, which is an adversary. So why wouldn't we support an American manufacturing company? So that's another bill that we got signed into law. And then finally, I worked with a colleague of mine, actually two, a gentleman by the name of Max Rose, who's a congressman from Staten Island, and another Republican colleague of mine, Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, on a fentanyl sanctions bill that was passed also as part of the Defense Authorization Act. Fentanyl, as we've seen here in Broome County, has been getting put into heroin. It's ending up on the streets and laced into heroin, which makes heroin much more potent and much more deadly. And this fentanyl is being manufactured in China. Right now, before this legislation that we got passed and signed into law, we weren't able to put sanctions on these drug companies over in China who are knowingly working with drug traffickers to import fentanyl into our country and then ending up on the streets in places like Broome County. So we got a fentanyl sanctions bill signed into law that will help hopefully stem the tide of fentanyl that's coming into the country and cutting down on the opioid and heroin overdoses. So that's just something that we've been working on. There's a number of other pieces of legislation that have been working their way through the House. We've passed somewhere in the neighborhood of 275 bipartisan bills in the House of Representatives over the last year. A lot of those, unfortunately, are not moving through the Senate right now. They haven't spent too much time legislating over the last year, so we're hoping some of the things that we've been able to do on health care, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, on prescription drugs, on a whole host of areas that we were able to pass last year can get enacted in the Senate hopefully this year and signed into law to really help improve the lives of Americans across the country. So happy to talk about any of that legislation or any topic whatsoever. And again, I just thank you all for being here and giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit tonight. So, great.
Thank you, Congressman. If you have a question or something you'd like to say, please raise your hand. We'll bring the mic over here into the aisles. He'll hold on to the mic, you talking to the mic, give him your couple minutes, and then you're done. We'll start with you, sir.
Oh, you'll hold on to it.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, Anthony. Very good to see you again, and I'm very happy to speak with you. I'm still looking forward to your promise from 3 years ago.
You have to speak into the mic, I think.
No, I'm speaking into the mic.
Yeah.
1, 2. Can you hear it now? Keep going. Do you hear it? You want to bring up the loud? 1. We're going to test 1.
Anything?
Well,
We gotta test it.
if you want to ask it, then I can always repeat the question.
Yes, use that one.
We're experiencing technical difficulties.
So, just to start again, I'm very happy to be here with you. It's always good to see you, and I'm still looking forward to your promise from 3 years ago that we've spoken about every time we see, real answers to my questions in an interview. Separate of that, very simply, I know you mentioned several bills that you've spoken about,
Yep.
but according to govtrack.com, you have 14 bills that you've actually sponsored, of which 70% have received less than 5 people supporting them, whether they be Democrats or Republicans, and you actually only have 1 bill that's reported as being passed. So I assume you're talking about co-sponsored
No, I'm
bills.
talking about bills I've led. So
According to GovTrack, that's not correct. They have you listed with 14, you have 9 that have less than 5 sponsors. That's according to GovTrack.
I can give you the bill numbers right now, and you can go back on the House.gov website and you can look them up yourself. I can't speak for GovTrack or the accuracy of that website, but if you'd like the bill numbers, I'll give them to you.
We will definitely go over that.
Okay.
Absolutely, and it is a recognized independent party, nationally recognized.
Sure.
That being said, so confusion there. But of the bills that you have been doing, I have noticed that there are bills like the Spoons Act, like the Chuck Ossier bill that you just recently put out, were actually work being done by your predecessor, Claudia Tenney.
Yeah.
Now, it concerns me that these bills and the lack of support that I've seen in Congress on the other bills I have noted, it makes it seem like there's no effectiveness.
Sure.
Talking about your first bill, which was on Spectrum, which you started off with 2017 promising to have Spectrum cut its rates. Since that time, they've raised rates twice. You're now going to re-election and you're again saying you're going to cut those rates. I've covered a couple of things, but specifically, I'm looking at, since we are seeing a lack of what I see as efficiency, why should we believe that you're going to be more efficient going forward? How is that going to improve?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the question, Mike. Let me try and break those down into a couple of different areas. So first, the bills that I talked about are the bills that I led on that got signed into law. So HR 2333 is the Support for Suicide Prevention Coordinators Act, signed into law December 20th, 2019. HR 2972, that's the Deborah Sampson Act, I'm sorry. HR 4285 is the bill that I talked about to extend programs to veterans in rural areas, signed into law by the President September 30th, 2019. The health insurance tax repeal, that was a bill that I led on with Congressman Marchant, and that bill was incorporated as part of the spending bill that we passed at the end of last year. Our bill was put into a spending bill. Sometimes bills pass on their own as standalone bills. Sometimes bills that you sponsor get incorporated into larger bills based on the advocacy we do to try and get that bill as part of a larger package. So the health insurance tax repeal was part of that spending bill. The Spoons Act, the support of the American manufacturing, that was a bill that we led on with Congressman McKinley, who's a congressman from West Virginia. That bill was incorporated into the National Defense Authorization Act as an amendment that I passed into the House. And then finally, the other bill that I mentioned was the fentanyl bill. I'll get to Chuck Ossier in a second. The fentanyl bill, another bill that I co-led on with Congressman Max Rose, was part of the National Defense Authorization Act. So those are 5 bills that I've sponsored, not just co-sponsored, those are bills that I've led on that have been signed into law by the President. You mentioned that we picked up 2 bills that our predecessor carried. Absolutely. First was the Spoons Act, which is a bill that my predecessor introduced. Unfortunately, she couldn't get it passed. She tried twice. It failed both times on the House floor. At that point, she wasn't even able to convince the chair of her own Armed Services Committee to support the bill. He was against the bill. One of those times that she attempted to pass it, she forgot to call for a recorded vote on the House floor, which is a big no-no. You know, if you lose a bill by voice vote, you immediately call for a recorded vote to get everyone on the record. Unfortunately, she didn't do that. I can't say why. You'll have to ask her that question. The other bill, Chuck Ossier bill, is a bill that would require the Veterans Affairs Committee to provide burial benefits for what they call non-traditional burials. So if you're cremated, if you're buried, the VA will pay for, and you get benefits. The VA will pay for burial, will give you a death benefit. But if you're cremated, they won't. That is a bill that my predecessor also did sponsor. It did not get passed. We reintroduced it, which is a very common practice, by the way, for a member to pick up bills that could have been sponsored by a previous member. And I would say derelict in my duty if a manufacturer called me and said, hey, your predecessor had this bill to support American manufacturing, we'd like you to take it. Could you imagine if I said no? I would not be doing my job, right? Or if a widow of a veteran calls me and says, my husband passed away a few years ago and I tried to get burial benefits for him, but the VA wouldn't do it. Your predecessor carried the bill. Would you, and she couldn't get it passed, would you be willing to take it up? Would I be doing my job if I told her no? So to criticize me for picking up bills that my predecessor
criticize you on that.
It's not a just
That wasn't the criticism.
Because I would not be doing my job if a constituent or a company called me and said, we'd like you to continue this effort, and I said no. That would be unfortunate. And then finally, Spectrum is a great topic. Love talking about Spectrum. Where's the TV camera? I love the news division, all right? The news people are great people. My beef is with the cable side of that. It's only because we've gotten a lot of complaints into my office, both when I was a state legislator and now about Spectrum. My first bill that I introduced was the Transparency for Cable Consumers Act. which is a bill meant to really go after companies like Spectrum who have been fined by state public service commissions to reveal certain information about their business practices that they fight tooth and nail to try and prevent from coming forward. You're right, Mike. I only have one co-sponsor on that bill.
That's right.
You know why? Because there are 28 different Spectrum lobbyists down in Washington buying off members of Congress, including my predecessor, who don't want to do anything to regulate these big cable companies that are taking advantage of you. So I won't stop going after this company because they are taking advantage, in my opinion, by raising people's cable bills and not expanding their service into areas that don't have cable. So I wish I had more support, but I got to fight an army of lobbyists who want that bill exactly where it is right now, it to stay in the Energy and Commerce Committee, because they have so many friends and former friends of Congress who they support that they don't want to have those bills move forward. So thank you for the questions.
Of course.
Anthony, thank you for your work.
Yes, sir.
Currently, California is producing what's called renewable natural gas. It's produced from cow waste. Have you had any opportunity to look into whether a federal program would make sense, and particularly the idea of helping family farms into such a program, if there was one, to give them an additional income stream?
I have not heard specifically about renewable natural gas, but if you're saying that there's a program in California, that's something, if you would share some information with us, I'd love to take a look at that. I think there's a lot of interesting ways that we can support family farmers, especially with their energy needs. I just was listening to my wife is a biologist, so we listen to science podcasts. And we were listening to one about a digester company that is in Massachusetts that takes food waste. There's a law in Massachusetts that you can't just, companies like Wegmans and Whole Foods and others can't just throw out food waste. They have to give it, donate it to these digester companies, and then they, whatever they do, transform, these digesters are located on farms, and they transform the food waste into energy, which can be used for all kinds of purposes. And it's supporting a lot of our family farmers, which is something that when I heard that, I asked my staff to go do a little more research about that to see if that's something that perhaps maybe here in New York we could look at, or even reach out to that company and see if they would maybe provide some digesters here in New York. I thought that might be an interesting idea. But certainly those are areas that whatever we can do to support our family farms, especially with their energy needs, is stuff we should be looking into. A lot of our farms, I sit on the agriculture committee, and a lot of our farms, family farms, are struggling right now. And what I worry about, we were talking about subsidies earlier that sometimes go to these larger corporate farms, which I think are a mistake. If we're going to hand out subsidies, I think they should be going to support smaller and medium-sized family farms, a lot of which are going out of business right now. And look, if you're a small dairy farmer and you have 60 cows or 100 cows on your farm, if you go out of business, you're going to sell those cows to a larger dairy farm, and pretty soon we're going to have bigger and bigger farms, and we're going to lose out on that local farm, which is going to hurt all of our economy in the area. But also, when you talk about things like climate change, I'd rather be purchasing food locally, which has less of a carbon footprint than importing container raspberries from Mexico or South America, which takes a lot more energy to get here. So if we can support local farmers and buy more local, I think that's something, that's an area that we should be doing much more of.
Hi, Congressman Brindisi. On behalf of everyone in this room, I'd like to thank you for taking the time. My name's Tim. I'm with the Binghamton Baseball Booster Club, and we're here to discuss and talk about the issue of potentially losing the Rumble bonus. Yeah. I understand Major League's proposal to X out 42 minor league teams.
Join it.
All right. Thank you. So Major League's proposal is an initial proposal to get rid of and alleviate out of 42 minor league teams throughout the system. And this would be a huge loss to our community. Our community has a rich history with AA baseball, especially the Eastern League. 1923, the Eastern League was found in the Arlington Hotel. Yeah. Even though that hotel is not in existence anymore, the Eastern League is still here and thriving in Broome County. In 1922, the federal court case on the Supreme Court on federal baseball was there to say that baseball is not a part of the antitrust laws, that baseball is a sport and baseball is not a business. However, Major League Baseball grossed $10.3 billion as an industry last year. Between the taxpayer dollars that have been spent and John Hughes' generous donation to our community here, there's been over $9 million put into NYSEG Stadium for player development, for our entertainment as Broome County residents and baseball fans. Yeah. I want to make this short and brief. It would be a huge shame to lose this organization of minor league baseball, especially as AA baseball. AA baseball is one of the best development leagues in the minor league system. Yep. Leo DeRocher, the Hall of Fame manager, said once, "Baseball's like church. Many people attend, few understand." Yeah. As all of our members of the Binghamton Baseball Booster Club, we understand, and it's our hope that you understand as well.
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. First, thank you for your advocacy around this issue, and I do understand, and I'll give you an update on what I've been doing down in Washington, because this affects a lot of cities across the country, and this is an area where party labels get checked at the door because the members who represent mostly smaller cities who have minor league baseball clubs that are under threat of being moved are banding together to really try and prevent this from happening. So one of the first things I did, and I met with Mr. Hughes, he actually came down to Washington, and I told him about our meeting. I met with the Deputy Major League Baseball Commissioner a couple months ago in Washington, and had my Rumble Ponies hat on, and said, look, AA baseball is very important to Binghamton. It's important to the entire southern tier. You have a lot of money that's been put into the stadium to improve, like you said, player development and the overall fan experience. And it'd be a real shame to see you all take the Rumble Ponies out of here, especially given the fact that we're a Mets affiliate, it's New York State. We should be working together to support a home state team. I walked away from the meeting very optimistic, to be honest with you, after speaking to the Deputy Commissioner. What he told me, he said, look, there's some issues with the stadium in terms of player development that they would like improved. And the owners get kind of caught in a catch-22 here because they want to increase ticket sales, and a lot of that has to do with improving the fan experience. But the Major League ball clubs want better player development. They want better locker rooms, they want better batting cages, they want better weight rooms and everything, which the minor league club's got to spend money on, but it doesn't necessarily improve, it doesn't get more fannies in the seats. So I said, look, if there's issues with the stadiums, I'd like to know, because they've spent a lot of money. The state's helped out, the city, the owners, they've spent a lot of money to improve this stadium. What's the issue with the stadium? And they didn't have an answer for me. So I said, look, give me a checklist. I want a checklist. Give me a checklist of what the issues are, and I'll go back and sit with Mr. Hughes and Senator Akshar and Donna Lapardo and Jason and Rich David, and we'll talk about what can we do collectively as a community, as local, state, and federal officials to try and help upgrade whatever needs to be upgraded, because we don't want to see this lost. I walked away optimistic because I felt that I don't think they really want to move the Rumble Ponies, to be honest with you. I think that they're really, Major League Baseball is looking at some other cities, particularly down south and out west, that are a little further away from their ball clubs. It makes sense having the Mets here because we're so close to New York City. And if there's issues with the stadium, let's figure it out. So I'm working, there's a bipartisan group of legislators in the House right now. We're gonna work to pass a resolution basically saying, Major League Baseball, you're doing pretty well these days. You get a lot of protections that are afforded to you by Congress. You came to us a couple years ago, got some more protections. So I think we do have some levers we can pull here that pull some leverage over Major League Baseball. But it's funny because as soon as I signed on to this resolution, we got a call from MLB saying, hey, I thought we had a great conversation. I said, look, you just tell me the Rumble Ponies are staying in Binghamton, I'll take my name off that resolution right away. But I'm not giving up, and we're going to continue to fight for this issue. I think it's important to the community that we all work as a community and as elected officials. I know the elected officials are all working together, regardless of party affiliation here locally, to try and make sure we keep the team here. I brought my kids there. I enjoy going to the stadium. It's a fun experience, and it'd be a shame to see the club leave, and we'll do what we can to save it.
If I may address the elephant in the room, pardon me.
Excuse me.
No, excuse me, I just want to ask one question. As we all know, today the president's under impeachment. I just had a question for you.
Excuse me, ma'am.
No,
We have a rule, everyone else is following it, and we're
I
gonna,
just have one
you can
question.
raise your hand and ask your question.
But I have to read something.
You can do that, raise your hand, and everybody else will get it.
Al Green, 2 weeks ago, 12 days ago, he said, and I quote, the genesis of impeachment, to be candid with you, was when the president was running for office.
All right. Even though she has not been respectful, the rest of us will be for just a moment. We'll let her ask her question, and we'll get on to everybody else.
According to Maxine Waters' interview with Essex Magazine in September of 2019, she said, I have been calling for impeachment of this president since inauguration. Ellen Farkas, the Deputy Undersecretary of the Department of Defense, an Obama appointee, said, when asked
can I
in
do?
the
She's just
Atlantic
gonna talk.
Council, if Donald Trump were elected, he'd be impeached pretty quickly, or else somebody would have to take over government, and I'm not even joking. Have your own town.
All right.
Amongst, I have 27 other names before he was even elected. Now, having said that, you told me, be quiet. You told us at the last town council that you were not going to vote for impeachment, and then you did.
Ma'am?
I'd like to answer to that. You lied to us. I want to answer. I want to answer.
Wait for a turn.
Happy to answer your question.
I would like to answer.
Happy to answer your question. If we can make, I will happy to answer your question. Okay. I never said that. What I said was I'm going to. First of all.
We're going to elect you. Not for impeachment. I have it on my phone.
Yes.
So don't pull that.
Okay.
I would like to know an answer to that.
What I
You
have.
represent us, and you lied to us. I want to know an answer.
What I said was that I was going to wait for all the evidence to come out before making a decision, and I did make that decision, and I'm sorry we disagree with it. Look, I also understand how frustrating.
Roll her out.
Honest answer.
I did, but here, listen.
You said we were going to let the people decide in November. Quote, unquote. Then you turned around and
I can understand how frustrating it is for you, and I actually sympathize with you when you mentioned some of those members of Congress who made those statements. I agree with you. Look, I have said that I'm someone who wants to work with the president and have demonstrated that I have an ability to do that. But it is very frustrating, I know, when people say right off the bat before a president even takes office that they want to do everything they can to get rid of that president. I remember when Barack Obama was elected, within a few days, Mitch McConnell said we have to do everything in our power to make him a one-term president. So I sympathize with you.
like to thank the rest of you for being respectful. This gentleman next.
Welcome to next.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Wow. Can't hear you. Can you hear me now? Thank you for coming tonight, Councilman, for this town hall meeting. I have a question for you. I was very happy to see that you were on the committee for the Veterans Affairs. I've been following what you've been doing. I like what you're doing. One of the few things I like what you've been doing. Okay? I'll be honest with you. But I want to ask you a question. The VA was a mess 3 or 4 years ago. It was a shame to our country what was happening. A lot of things have happened in the VA in the last 3 or 4 years, 3 years in particular. And that's been privatization of the VA. What is your position on that? Because you only talked about the VA in terms of government.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you quite honestly, I am very concerned about privatizing the VA. Many veterans that I speak to like the care that they're getting at the VA. However, there are certain instances where if a veteran cannot get the care at the VA, or perhaps they live far away from a VA and it's going to take too long to get an appointment, then I believe they should be able to go out into the community to get the care that they need. So you have to be able to look at that and be able to respond to that. The Mission Act, which is legislation that was passed and signed into law, does a lot of that. And one of the things right now, as it's being implemented, I'm trying to do a lot of oversight and listening to veterans throughout the community to hear how it's working for them. If there's wait times at the VA, are they getting options to go other places? So if you or you know other veterans that are not getting that kind of care, I'd like to know that so we can conduct the proper oversight in the Veterans Affairs Committee to make sure veterans are getting the care that they need. But I can tell you from a lot of veterans that I talk to, they're very happy with the VA. They like going to the VA because they're there also with other veterans, and they can, it helps with the healing process. And I think despite some of the problems that we've seen around the country with the VA, with long wait times, we're actually in our district, it's split between Syracuse and Albany. We have the hospital up in Syracuse, you have one in Albany as well. Then you have the clinics up in Rome and one here in Binghamton, which are part of the Syracuse VA, and then over in Bainbridge in Shenango County, they go to Albany. That's another issue that we worked on, and actually I was successful leading an effort, getting an amendment in the, again, National Defense Authorization Act to prevent the VA, because they want to close that clinic over in Bainbridge there, and I think that would be a mistake because you have many veterans, it's a rural area, and it's very hard for veterans without adequate transportation to get to where they want to move it to. So we passed an amendment that I led that we got signed into law saying that the VA cannot move that clinic unless they do a market study. You see, as part of this Mission Act, the VA has to conduct these market area assessments to determine if they have proper coverage in an area, where they have to put more physicians or healthcare providers, that kind of thing. And we found out that the VA out of Albany was going to close this Bainbridge clinic without going through this market assessment. And I said, well, I questioned one of the deputy secretaries that actually had him come to Bainbridge to take a tour and said, well, how do you move this place without the study? Don't you have to do a study first, then move it? So we were at least successful getting that amendment passed and signed into law saying they can't move it until they do this study. But that doesn't mean it's not going to move. We got to continue to keep our eye on the ball and show them, a lot of times what I think they want to do is they try to limit coverage, or the doctor's only there a couple days a week or something like that. So a veteran's forced to go up to Albany or another clinic, when if they just adequately staff the Bainbridge clinic, then veterans will get the care they need. And in a rural county like Shenango, and also Delaware, which utilizes the clinic, I would hate to see a clinic in a rural area like that move out of the area.
But that's the exact reason that privatization, at my defense, I've got a lot of veterans I know, and they like the privatization because they have flexibility, and you're talking inflexible.
No, I think flexibility is a good thing. I think if the care is available at the VA and the wait time is not long, I'd like them to utilize the VA. If they can't get the care, if they're not a specialist that they need to see, or if the wait time is too long, that veteran should be able to go out into the community and get it from a community provider.
Okay, that's what I want to hear. So I'll be watching for you to support this type of thing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Congressman, I understand that you're one of the more conservative Democrats in the House, and that correspondingly, the 22nd District is rather conservative. But it also occurs to me that the district is going to change following the census and redistricting. So I'm curious to know if the district were to become more liberal, say if it were to include Ithaca, for instance, would you correspondingly change to match that district ideologically as well as you match the current district?
To be honest with you, first we got to get past November, and we're going to have to go through a census here in New York State, and hopefully that census turns out. I know that the state's putting some money behind census efforts. There's a potential we could lose 1 or 2 congressional seats here in New York, and what they did in the past is took one from upstate, one from downstate. You know, I am who I am. I can't really change, and people always say, well, he voted this way because his district is this way, or he didn't vote this way because his district is this way. I can tell you honestly that I try to vote my conscience every single time, but I also want to get feedback from the district as well. I'm more of a moderate person, so I can't see changing that the way I am, because I truly believe that we got to have folks that can work together on both sides. You know, I think one big problem we have in this country right now is districts are so gerrymandered, where if you're not conservative enough, you're going to get challenged from your right. If you're not liberal enough, you're going to get challenged from your left. And it creates the divide gets farther and farther, where people aren't willing to work together to get things done. And I think you have to work together to get things done. You know, I joined this Problem Solvers Caucus when I got into the House, which is a bipartisan caucus. There's 23 Democrats, 23 Republicans. You can't enter the caucus unless you get a member from the other side of the aisle. And we sit down every week and we talk about immigration or gun violence or climate change. It's hard for many people to believe that Democrats and Republicans sit down every week and talk, but we do. And we're actually trying to move some things forward. You know, we were very supportive of USMCA, the new trade deal with Mexico and Canada. I got a chance to go to the White House as part of that group to go meet with the Vice President about that, because I felt it would help our farmers and our manufacturers back home. There's an agricultural labor bill that we pushed our support behind to update some of our agricultural labor issues that we're having in this country. Another bipartisan bill that a piece of a bill that I'm working on is part of that, to help our dairy farmers who need year-round workers. So I can't see for changing my stripes, and I don't want to pander. I want to do what's right, and you know. But it's also important, I think, to hear from constituents firsthand.
Thanks for answering.
I just happen to think it's rather disingenuous on your statements against Spectrum News, given the fact that they practically bankrolled the entire Assembly's campaign against every Republican in the state. And now it just so happens that this bill is sitting dormant with nothing happening, while all of our cable bills are going up more in the last year than they did the 2 years before that. The money was handed down, it seemed to go out everywhere, and Spectrum seems to be very happy with where all things was. And I find it very disingenuous statements in here on that topic.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry about that. I have said that I think that this is a company that is does not have good business practices. I've put my efforts behind passing legislation to try and rein in some of their business practices. We've worked. Right now, I've sent a letter to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, because we just heard from some constituents about their debt collection practices. People being sent by Spectrum to a debt collector for unreturned equipment, which people thought they returned. So I'm sorry if you feel I'm being disingenuous. I'm trying to do everything I can, and would love to have some more friends in the fight.
Would you be willing to admit that none of their money from those lobbyists that you mentioned went into your campaign?
No, I don't take money from corporations.
Any of your colleagues?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
You get large donations and then divvy that out to other campaigns, like your campaign against Claudia Tenney?
No, you can look at every campaign contribution I've taken, both on the state election commission website or on the federal election commission website.
All right, thank you. Here.
Hi, thank you again for coming and speaking with us. For some might not know, there's a lot of people know that there's a physician shortage, and it's just getting worse and worse. And how the way that residencies are paid for is through Medicare. And I know last year the Senate and the House, they both had different bills to address that. And the House, over 5 years, are looking to add 15,000 residency spots. Where is that right now? Do they look to do any more? Because yeah, without the increase in residency spots, we're just gonna, it's just gonna get worse.
You're 100% correct. And, the issue on physician shortages is an issue that affects our district in particular, especially as you get out into more rural areas. Healthcare practitioners in general, it's very hard to find, and a lot more has to be done. I want to look at that because I want to say that there was something, maybe part of HR 3, which was a prescription drug bill, or another bill, that we did something to increase the number of slots for residencies. But I just don't know off the top of my head, but if I can get your information and I'll make sure my staff follows up with you. But I think on the broader question around physician shortages, a lot more has to be done, whether it's tax incentives or tax credits for physicians to go into underserved areas. I think those make a lot of sense. Loan forgiveness, we're having this big debate around student loan debt and some of the actions of our education secretary who won't forgive some student loan debt for people who are taken advantage of by for-profit colleges, which is unfortunate. And we just passed a bill to show our displeasure in the House over some of her actions. But again, loan forgiveness and things like that, I think are something we need to be doing more of to encourage physicians to go into underserved areas. And it's tough. I mean, you look at doctors, a lot of young people are not going into the profession right now because, by the time you get through your residency and everything else, you're now into your 30s and you're saddled with all kinds of student loan debt before you can actually start earning some money to support a family, where an 18-year-old kid would rather invent a new app for their iPhone and become a billionaire overnight. So we need to encourage more young people to go into medical school, and certainly I think loan forgiveness and incentives to go into underserved areas can help with that. But I know there's a specific bill that we're working on, but I just can't think of it off the top of my head.
The Physician Shortage Reduction Act.
Yeah.
2019, and that's to add 15,000 residency spots over the next 5 years.
Is that the one that Schumer sponsored? I know Schumer has one. I actually know Mr. Cadwell up in Syracuse, I believe, has one as well that we're a co-sponsor of. But I'll find out for sure, and you just make sure you get some information through some of our staff who are here. Can you guys raise your hands? So we have some staff in the back. Harris, who works in our Binghamton office. Faith, who's by the back door there, also works in our Binghamton office. And then my Chief of Staff, Macy, is here as well, and Connor, who's from our DC office, and Claudia, who also works in our Utica office. So for any individual constituent issues, please feel free to come see me afterwards or talk to one of our staff members, whether it's a Medicare issue, Social Security, IRS, immigration, whatever it may be. We have some case forms and we can make an inquiry on your behalf.
Sir, did you have a question? Oh, sorry.
The way that lady spoke was incorrect, but she did bring up good points.
Yep.
You do represent a district that majority is Republican, and I'm just wondering why you voted against what the district supports.
Yeah, well, look, at the end of the day, what I felt was I had to follow the evidence and see if there was enough evidence in my estimation to move forward with an indictment, basically. Basically what the House is like a grand jury, and you have to decide whether or not there's enough evidence to move forward, and then the Senate ultimately has to have a trial and determine whether or not there's enough evidence to convict. I felt that given some of the evidence that had come forward, especially some of the evidence from the testimony that I heard, there was enough to move forward. I have said that I don't think using military assistance and asking a foreign government to interfere in our political elections is a good use of power. I think it's an abuse of power. And that's why I felt that, that's why I voted the way I did. Having said that, it was an issue that took me great time to decide because I wanted to go through and review all the evidence, and I have worked quite successfully with the president on a number of issues.
It's just based off that, would you say that Joe Biden should not run for president?
Well, that's up to, that's okay, that's a good question.
It's the same thing, you know, I mean.
Yeah, here's what I would say.
You can watch the video.
Yeah, look, here's what I'll say. If there is evidence of wrongdoing by the vice president, then that should be looked into by our authorities here in this country. It should be referred over to our officers. And if there's wrongdoing, then certainly that should be taken care of. You know, I'll say this, there have to be stronger laws in this country to try and prevent family members from trading on their names.
No, I absolutely agree.
And that's something we gotta do, because technically, it's not illegal, but certainly in my book, it's unethical, and family members should not be getting ahead because their father or mother or whoever serves in a high position in government. And that's where we need to be looking at, how do we make laws to prevent that from happening?
I just wanted to ask, and this is part of a bigger question, I wanted to ask about the particulars of the Prescription Drug Act that got passed, because I think it's still, if I'm not mistaken, sitting at the Senate as, I don't know how many bills, and you may know at this point that have passed Congress that are sitting there when you all are accused of not doing anything.
Well,
So
last,
it's just about
yeah.
prescription drug.
On the prescription drug issue, I'll tell you, on a large, the broader question, there's been something like 400 bills that have been passed in the House, 275, the last number I saw of those were bipartisan, which are now sitting dormant in the Senate. On the prescription drug issue, we passed in December H.R. 3 to lower prescription drug costs, and I supported this bill. I think this is a good bill because it does a number of things. One, it will allow Medicare to negotiate with drug companies for some of the most expensive medications like insulin and cancer medications. Right now, the VA can negotiate with drug companies, the Department of Defense can negotiate with drug companies, but when Medicare Part D was passed, there was a part of that that said Medicare can't negotiate with drug companies, which was a big win to the pharmaceutical industry. To me, that makes no sense. Medicare should be able to negotiate for drug companies, and even if you're not a Medicare recipient, you will also benefit from that as well, because the price Medicare negotiates, the private health insurer can ask for that price as well. So I think that's going to help everybody. The other piece of it that I really like is it would cap out-of-pocket costs for Medicare Part D enrollees to $2,000. So you would not be paying over $2,000 in your out-of-pocket expenses. I thought that was another area where I thought really would help. We did a number of roundtables I did throughout the district just solely on the prescription drug issue, and we heard all kinds of stories from people who are making very tough decisions about medications that they can afford in a given week and what food they're going to purchase at the grocery store. I had one woman tell us about her cancer medication costing $30,000 every few months. That should not happen in this country, in my opinion, and this is an area where you have folks in the Senate that want to do something on prescription drugs, you have the House which already passed a good bill, you have the President talking about it. Let's sit down and figure out where we have overlap, and let's move on those. I'm working on a couple bills myself right now. I have a Congressman, Mr. Joyce from Pennsylvania. He and I sponsor a bill regarding generic drugs. A lot of times these big pharmaceutical companies will utilize what they call pay-for-delay tactics. They don't want generics coming to the market because it will create more competition. So they will file all these phony petitions at the FDA to slow down the process of the prescription drug, the generic coming to market. And a study was done about these petitions that they filed. In fact, there was one back in 2015 where there was a generic version of another version of the EpiPen that was making its way through, and the owners of EpiPen filed this petition saying the generic or the other version was unsafe, and it can come to find out that some scientists dug into their petition and found out that it was all based on junk science. The only reason this company filed the petition was they wanted to stop the generic from coming to market or slow it down at the FDA. That to me is wrong, and we need to have more competition. So I'm working on a bill with Mr. Joyce to prevent those kinds of pay-for-delay tactics. And then another bill that I'm working on deals with biosimilar drugs. These are, again, very expensive medications used to treat cancer. A lot of success with these drugs. Our bill would cap out-of-pocket expenses for seniors who are receiving biosimilars. This is the pharmaceutical industry, in my opinion, needs to be reined in. You have taxpayer dollars that are going to fund a lot of the research and development, and we have no price controls in this country. So they have price controls in other countries, but we pay out the wazoo for prescription drugs, and the pharmaceutical companies get away with it. I think they're doing a lot with research and development, and we want that to continue. But again, when you're using NIH dollars for a lot of that development, there should be some say in what we're paying for prescription drugs here.
Hello, peace.
Hi.
My name is Ali Azam. I was born in India. I'm a Muslim. I work for New York State Department of Labor and Endicott for the last 21 years. And my question is pertaining to human rights in that part of the world. Many of the audience, as well as many of our congressmen and elected officials, don't know what is happening in that part of the world. You are from Utica, and there are a lot of Rohingya Muslims from Burma in your constituency.
Yes, there are.
And you know that what's happening to Rohingya Muslims. Their citizenship has been taken away, and they are refugees with, a lot of killings by the Burma junta army, and other part is China has 2 million Muslims in concentration camps because of their religion, and India in Kashmir has revoked the Article 370, according to which the UN mandated referendum was to take place in India, in Kashmir for last 70 years, and that is the most militarized land in the world. For every one Kashmiri citizen, for every 12 Kashmiri citizens, there is one soldier in Kashmir. And lastly, in India, they have introduced now a Citizenship Amendment Act, wherein they are trying to take away the citizenship of like 20 million Muslims already, telling them to prove that they were citizens by showing the birth certificate of their grandparents. When 90% of the country is illiterate and there were no birth certificates. So this is part of ethnic cleansing. I'm talking all this, many people don't know, but from Human Rights Watch and the front page articles in New York Times, Washington Post, NPR, and other reputable organizations. So all this thing is happening, and BJP is the political wing of Rashtriya Seva Sangh, Bharatiya Janata Party, and RSS, the Godse of RSS, they are the killers of Mahatma Gandhi. And so Narendra Modi and the Hindutva are the open admirers of Hitler and Mussolini. So my question is, the Genocide Watch has issued a red warning for India, and RSS is like KKK, Indian KKK, or Hindu ISIS.
Okay.
And lot of money, millions of dollars from here go to India for all these things. So my concern is I have family in India. So what you are, first of all, are you aware of all these countries, what is happening and what you will do?
I am not as aware to the extent that you have described, but this is something that I would certainly like to sit down with you and talk a lot more about. And we will reach out to Human Rights Watch. We meet with them on a regular basis, and certainly sitting on the Armed Services Committee, where a lot of aid is given to different countries for support, we really have to make sure that, in my opinion, that aid is going to countries that are not committing human rights abuses around the world. And we should all speak out, whether we're members of Congress all the way up to the President of the United States, when we see human rights abuses being committed in China, in India, in Saudi Arabia, wherever it is across the world. That's what makes our country so great, is that we should be the force for good and be speaking out against these human rights abuses across the world, and certainly not providing aid to countries that are committing these abuses. So I would like to talk more with you about that and see what we can do in Congress. And I very much appreciate you bringing up the refugee community up in Utica, because this is an issue that also concerns me, because the refugee resettlement program in our country has been slashed to almost nothing to where it was when the program first started under, I think it was President Nixon years ago. I have seen the benefits firsthand refugees have had in my home city of Utica, because they have come in and have come from all over the world for the last 30 years, and within a few short years are learning the language and working in local companies. They are buying homes and renovating those homes. A couple of years ago, the city of Utica's Urban Renewal Department, which takes back a lot of houses because of back taxes and things like that, ran out of houses to sell because the refugees had bought them all. And what they're doing when they buy them is they're going to the local lumber store to buy whatever goods it is to fix up that house and get it back on the tax rolls. And then you talk about a lot of the big employers in our area. Chobani is one of them that employs a lot of refugees. That's a good thing for the economy. So I think we're a compassionate country, and to see what's happening to the refugee resettlement program, to me, is a travesty, and I disagree very much so with the administration on this. Yes, we have to make sure we don't want to let people into this country who are going to harm us, but the vetting that the refugees go through the State Department, it takes years before they're allowed to come into this country. They go through all kinds of vetting, and I think are providing a tremendous benefit to many communities.
Good evening, Congressman. First of all, thank you for being here to talk with us and not at us tonight. We really appreciate it. I'd like to switch gears and talk about agriculture for a second. As you know, New York State is #1 in the nation for producing milk. In particular, we're #1 in yogurt, cottage cheese, and sour cream. But yet, in the last 2 months, we've seen Dean Foods claim bankruptcy and Borden Foods claim bankruptcy as well. And it seems like our dairy farmers are being blamed for global warming. It seems like they're putting a lot of weight on dairy farmers and they're losing money. In your opinion, what can we do to help our dairy farmers?
Well, I think we, as a general public, drink more whole milk would be one thing that we can do to help our dairy farmers. But again, you're right. A lot of stress is being put on our dairy farmers. I have an agricultural advisory committee here in the district that's made up of farmers, and was actually just on a dairy farm the other day up in Oneida County talking to a small dairy farmer up there about some of their challenges. And there's been a lot of challenges for them. A lot trade and tariffs have hurt them. That's why I was such a big supporter of this new trade deal with Mexico and Canada, because it would help a lot of our dairy farmers with the excess supply of milk that's out on the market right now. Some of the things that I've been working on is trying to get healthier options, more whole milk back into the schools. I know USDA had done away with that years ago, but they're moving now where they have 1% back, and I think that kind of good fat has been shown to help with brain development and other things. So it's good to have those healthier options in the schools. But again, you're right. I think a lot of it comes down to education. We did We did a news conference at Cornell Cooperative Extension here a couple months ago about chocolate milk. And it was over New York City school districts wanting to ban chocolate milk, which people said, we were a congressman from upstate New York, why are you getting involved in New York City school district politics? And I said, well, one, if you look at studies, it's shown that school districts that have tried to do away with flavored milk options over the years, they've actually seen a decrease in amount of food waste, so students aren't eating that, and they're turning to other sugary types of drinks, not getting those 9 essential benefits that you get from health benefits from having whole milk in the schools and giving flavored milk as an option. So it should be a part, as American Academy of Pediatrics and others say, it should be part of a balanced diet, and it's a mistake to really take those options out of public schools. And New York City, with 1 million students down there who purchase a lot of milk from upstate New York farmers, I'd hate to see them banning chocolate milk or flavored milk options, because that's going to ultimately hurt a lot of farmers in upstate New York as well. But yeah, you're right, they've been struggling, and there's a lot more we have to do. I think USMCA is a good step. I think another issue that I hear a lot about from farmers is around immigration and the ability to find year-round workers. That's why I was a big supporter of this agricultural labor bill that we passed in the House, which would allow the H-2A program to be expanded to year-round, so farmers who need workers, migrant workers, can have access to that program, dairy farmers in particular. So there's a lot more we got to be doing to help support our family farms. And I brought the agriculture secretary up here to visit Chobani and talk to local farmers last year. Sonny Bertu came up to meet with farmers because I wanted to see firsthand what some of the struggles our small family farms are facing.
Yes, first off, I'd like to thank you for being here, and I'd like to thank all the young people that are here. Unfortunately, I'm a little disappointed. I wish there were more of you. We're really going to be doing Also, I want to commend you because I want somebody in Washington, D.C. that is doing what's right and doesn't associate themselves necessarily with what their party says and doesn't go off of that. I want somebody that uses common sense and does what's right, because that's all important for all of us.
Yep.
I'm a veteran. I was in the military 35 years ago, and our main goal was to make the country safe. And unfortunately, I feel for my grandchildren and my children today because I feel more unsafe than we've ever been.
Yeah.
So my main concerns, and if you could just talk a little bit about your take on it, is foreign policy and more so climate change, because it's coming,
yeah,
and it's coming hard and faster, and unfortunately I think it's coming faster than the scientists even know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you
for your service. And with regard to foreign policy, obviously sitting on the Armed Services Committee, this is an area that we certainly have to look at. And I think one thing that we need is some certainty and need to have a strategy across the globe when we're dealing with adversaries, whether it's North Korea, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's China, which is a major threat, and I'm not sure enough attention is being paid to them right now because of what's happening in Russia, of course, as always. They are not our friend. But certainly we have to have a clear strategy, and I think that's been something that's been missing from the administration is really, what is the strategy in the Middle East? What is the strategy done with China? What is the strategy with North Korea? It's nice to get photo ops with dictators, but you don't want to just give them all that they want with not getting something in return. It seems like we're not getting much in return from some of these countries who have been our adversaries. So we have to have a clear mission in these parts of the world, and that's something that I think the administration has to do a better job expressing what their strategic vision is for these hotspots around the world. Climate change, again, another serious issue that is affecting the globe. And look, when it comes to foreign policy, I think one of the biggest mistakes that we made was bailing on the Paris Climate Accord, because we are really the leader, and we should be the leader and take a leading role in combating climate change. and I think we can do that being respectful to business and recognizing the advantages that green technology has and how we can create more jobs in this field. And there hasn't been any willingness on the part of the administration to even acknowledge the science that's out there. So we're going to move forward in the House. We passed the Climate Change Protection Act last year. There's a select committee on climate change right now that will be introducing a series of proposals over the next couple of months in the House, which we will pass this year. We're trying to get some bipartisan support on this, and there are members on both sides of the aisle, believe it or not, that want to do something to fight pollution and to address climate change, and we don't have time to wait. As you said, it's one of the greatest threats that's facing our globe right now, and we don't have a lot of time to wait around, so we got to see what we can get passed right now on a bipartisan basis and get something done. But again, it's an issue that concerns me. It's an issue that concerns my wife, who's a biologist. It's something we talk about quite regularly. I have started an environmental advisory group here in the district, really trying to bring people together of different backgrounds to talk about this issue and really help educate the public more. You know, we're seeing all these devastating floods that are happening. We're no strangers to flooding in the southern tier. You know, these storms up on Halloween that affected a lot of the northern part of the district. You know, these storms used to come after a snow melt or in May or June. Now we're getting them all year round, and it's coming much more fast and furious, and climate change has a lot to do with that. So unfortunately, when you ask people about this, you know, in polls and things like that, it doesn't rise to the level of importance for a lot of folks. So one of the things that we're working on in our committee is trying to educate people in this district, county by county, what is the impact of climate change in the 22nd district, and what can we be doing to try and help prevent it.
Can you speak to renewable energy in New York?
Absolutely. So I think on the issue of renewable energy, one of the things that I think would make a great investment and would help encourage more renewable energy would be an investment in our infrastructure, and particularly our energy grid here in New York State. We have a very old grid here in New York State, and a lot of times when you're in the summer months and you have peak demand, the hydroelectric power, which is clean energy being produced up in the North Country, can't get onto the energy grid, onto the grid here in New York State because the grid is overloaded and old. So we have to make investments in our infrastructure, upgrade our grid to a 21st century grid, which will then encourage more renewable forms of energy, wind, solar, you name it. You know, I toured a wind farm up in Madison County, which is in the district, and I was shocked to learn that despite this very lofty goal New York State just passed of going more renewable, this wind power that they're creating in Madison County is being shipped to New England. And I was like, what are you talking about? Why isn't it, you know, it was being sold in New York, and now it's being shipped to New England because New York isn't buying the energy. So that's something we're looking into a little bit more. In the meantime, New York is spending money through the Power Authority here to bring in coal from New Jersey to help New York City with their energy needs. You know, if we have here in upstate New York the ability to produce wind, but we just can't get it to where it's got to go because the grid is too old, let's make an investment in the grid and then get more clean energy, renewable energy onto the grid to go to New York City or wherever it needs it, instead of importing, you know, spending $1 billion through the Power Authority to build a line under the Hudson to take in dirty coal from New Jersey.